Hello, friends. Welcome to the Nexus podcast. I'm your host, James Dice. Each week, I fire questions at the leaders of the smart buildings industry to try to figure out where we're headed and how we can get there faster without all the marketing fluff. I'm pushing my learning to the limit, and I'm so glad to have you here following along. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Nexus Pro. Nexus Pro is an annual or monthly subscription where members get exclusive writing, podcasts, and invites to members-only Zoom gatherings. You can find info on how to join and support the podcast at nexuslabs.online. Without further ado, please enjoy this episode of the Nexus podcast. Episode 53 is a conversation with Jim Whalen, Senior Vice President and CIO and CTO of Boston Properties. We talked about Boston Properties' portfolio of buildings, their different technology and digitization initiatives, and Jim took us through the unique challenges inherent to the business of being a multi-tenant landlord. Then we took a bit of a deep dive into Boston Properties' journey with data, energy efficiency, and IAQ. Without further ado, please enjoy Nexus Podcast episode 53. Hello, Jim. Welcome to the Nexus Podcast. Can you introduce yourself?
Sure, James. Thank you for having me today. So I'm Jim Whalen. I'm Senior Vice President, CIO, and CTO of Boston Properties. So
cool. Yeah, I'm super excited to unpack everything with you today. Can you talk about your personal and career background? How'd you get here?
Sure. Yeah. So I think by the math, I'm in my 24th year at Boston Properties in this role. So it's been an incredible journey. But originally, James, when I came out of school, I had a New York City urban fellowship. I'm born and raised in New York, multi-generation in New York City, and I actually worked in public housing. So I worked in the mid 1980s in just this transformative period of time when the city was investing at the time $4 billion in taking all the real estate it had taken in REM and tax foreclosure and turning it back into residential housing. That those numbers would probably be $8 or $9 billion in today's dollars. So I was thrown in with this team that went into housing preservation development and transformed that platform to deliver on that program and put in networks across the 5 boroughs, systems, metrics, and data. So I have a whole data theme as part of my story, but I started back in this really transformative early career that was an amazing opportunity. I had a 5-year contract with my wife. She's from Boston, so we brought the kids north, and I actually went and worked in international relief and development work for 5 years. I traveled the globe to the poorest places of the planet. Ran IT in 100 offices in 28 countries and 500,000 relationships we managed. A fascinating 5 years of my life. I was on the road 30-40% of my time all over the globe. And I just, again, and during that period of time, I was Kaizened. So Kaizen, TQM, total quality management. Today it would be Six Sigma, but back then it was I was Kaizened, and really, that was a takeaway for me, separate. But again, not sustainable with a young family, right? I needed to move. So I came back to real estate, and I actually responded to an ad in the newspaper for Beacon Properties. So Beacon Properties is this very long, well-established company. Had been in Boston for 40 plus years. I think I was there when we celebrated our 50th anniversary. And it was a private company that had construction and residential. And we actually took that public as a real estate investment trust, spun the construction company out. It basically seeded Skanska's operations here in Boston, and then spun out the residential company, and we basically then grew the office. Blew it out into DC, Atlanta, Chicago, LA as a real estate investment trust. But we got bought by Equity Office, the behemoth at the time that was, again, in this acquisition. So I actually decommissioned that platform. I was like the last man standing, closing up shop. And I didn't know whether I could stay in real estate in Boston. There wasn't a lot of, franchises here, but Boston Properties had been around for, 27 years and went public in mid 1997, just timing wise. And I was recruited and came over here, and it's just been this incredible journey. In the last 24 years of just leading the technology innovation here. And it just, I get excited. I'm excited every day I come in here. So that's kind of so I look at it, I was in public service, I was in government, I was in nonprofit, I was private. And then really for the last 29 years as a public, but 34 years in commercial real estate. And, and it's been very much a focus. I look back, very much a focus on local. One of the things, Norman Leventhal was a founder of Beacon Properties, and he always, this mantra and the culture there was like, you always walk the property. You always walk the property, right? And that mantra is kind of, built into how I've kind of focused, because where our work gets done is at the properties, in the engineering locations. I'm finally starting to travel again in 2 weeks, and I have 6, 7 property visits, and I just plan to, again, that's the pulse of where we, deliver our services, deliver our, to our customers. So it's been a great journey of several decades and digital transformation along the way, so.
Yeah. I'm a firm believer in walking properties too. When I was at NREL, there was this whole like remote energy audit movement, and I think it's still happening. And I always was very skeptical about that. There's so much that you see when you're walking through a mechanical room
Oh
that you
yeah, well,
can't see.
just talking with the teams, and you get a pulse on what's going on, and
Yeah.
asking about their capital programs, asking about their operational challenges, asking about their IT. That would be my, because people don't raise their hands. You got to raise you got me as a captive audience, So
Yeah.
right. So,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Just like the reactions you get from questions
Mhm.
are so telling about how the buildings run and what's going on, day to day. So last time you and I talked, you talked about staying sane through the pandemic by cycling. You're a big cycler too, right? Personally.
I am. Yeah, no, I enjoy. I was actually out at sunrise this morning at 5:30 up the river and on the Charles River, and that's my happy place and my happy time, and where I actually get to think and, also think about the solving problems on the bike ride. So I don't know if you are, but that's my happy place. So
Yeah, I'm a big runner, but I only run so that I can play soccer.
yeah,
And when I play soccer, I don't think very much about much besides the game. That's what I like about it. It's because I think way too much every day, all day anyway. So, cool. So can you talk about what the Boston Properties portfolio is like today?
yeah, sure. Yeah. So it's when I look at Boston Properties, we are the largest publicly traded developer, owner, manager of Class A office. Right. That's a statement.
Period.
Right. That's a period. Right. And so we manage 196 properties, a little over 51 million square feet. Last year's revenue is $2.8 billion in revenue. And again, we operate in 5 markets. So we started obviously in Boston, logically, have our brand. Mort Zuckerman and Ed Lindy founded the company in 1970. So we just celebrated our 50th anniversary. Right, pretty significant.
Yeah.
And then went to New York, went to DC. After going public, we went into San Francisco in a big way with Embarcadero Center. And then more recently, the last 5 years at Los Angeles, specifically the Santa Monica market. So we, a couple things about the platform. I talked about the culture, it's a culture of just, Morton had built this culture of integrity, operational excellence, customer service, financial discipline, and being really smart about the real estate, right? So that's just the fabric of how we run our platform and how we service our customers. And the other aspect is that just, they fundamentally believed in the value of development, maintaining your development capabilities in the ups and downs of the markets, right? So, our platform since 2010, has delivered or stuff that's actively under construction, over $9 billion of construction. $9 billion of construction, right? And I think I can quote 10 with some of the recent projects we just approved. But we built Salesforce Tower, right? We those kind of marquee properties. We're building Marriott's new headquarters right now, Fannie Mae's new headquarters, right? Akamai's new headquarters, right? So these major assets in gateway cities, which is our focus, it's been just a tremendous platform and it's a capital engine, it's a capital engine because this is capital intensive work, and just how we manage that. And it's just been a great journey to be along with, the growth of the company and, just what we've delivered. Right. So.
Cool. Yeah, I remember last time I was in San Francisco, the Salesforce Tower was going up. That was probably 2017, something like that.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like an
yeah.
icon in the city. It's
Yeah, no, it's
massive.
defined to really
Mhm.
redefines the center of the city and the
Yeah.
downtown market. So South of Market. So a very exciting project. I mean, we could riff on that, if we wanted to. So
Yeah, I'm thinking we should talk about new buildings at some point here.
yeah.
Let's start with your role though. Can you talk about your role and your team that supports you?
Yeah, yeah. So I talked about, again, 24 years. The journey has kind of been, again, I was looking chapters, and obviously initially it was getting the public company stood up, not being prepared to be a public company, and it's morphed over time. And I would say, especially since 2010, my role has definitely changed. So I have a team. We have very deep competencies centered on our financial stack of applications logically, right? Again, the integrity of running a public entity, networking and infrastructure. The network facilitates our business fundamentally as a real estate company. Just think, and we'll talk about that, right? And then data capabilities, and I know we'll cover that as well. But we have these in cyber, we have these core capabilities that we build expertise around, and then through our partners, through real partnerships, because when we take on a partnership, James, it's a partnership. Like I believe, I mean, the model here is to make each other better, right?
Hmm.
So the partnerships we've done in incubating new early companies, like a company like BTS, and helping them, whether it be a platform like Angus, those companies. When we go all in, we're all in, right? So that's one thing. And then my role is, I obviously oversee the IT staffing here and the mission and what we do, but I've really kind of morphed into as much an executive sponsor of initiatives and innovation around the company. So we have working groups. I chair an IAQ working group. Again, we'll talk about that. I have an access control technology working group that's been active for 3.5 years. We're spinning up a new one on facility data and analytics. So these, to bring across disciplines together to tackle and create a framework for the company to then execute on, right, around these
Yeah.
technologies. So I navigate. We talked about 5 markets. Boston Properties executes very entrepreneurially in each of these markets. It creates an operating platform that goes at it, right?
Hmm.
And then corporate, and again, tech, because of the reliance on technology, is really here to facilitate, grease the skids, coordinate, build consensus as a framework that we can then execute as a company. And that's been the role.
How do these working groups work? Where do you pull the people from?
So the example on the IAQ one, we'll talk about this, but we brought people from the business side and property management who deal with customers on a daily basis, deep engineering, extra engineering experts around the company, sustainability, IT, and in this case, data. At the table. So you think about just what do you need around the table on the facility data. I've got construction, development, sustainability, engineering represented at the table, bringing expertise, and in this process, building depth and knowledge that they become, the knowledge look, knowledge. It's not about me. It's about these building depth and capacity and reference points in the organization that can kind of move things forward. So it's, again, that's in a decentralized model. How do you think about, you build organizational capacity
Yeah.
around these technologies? And so that's the kind of, anyway, some touch points here.
Cool.
So.
Really cool. All right. Sorry to interrupt you. The framework.
Oh yeah. So my framework, the way I think about it, I've had this framework for about 3 years, is I have 3 buckets, right? So I'm responsible for running the enterprise, running the platform. So we have about 100 applications, the integrity of our financials, all the computers, all the phones, all the mobile devices, everything that kind of runs the platform. And there's themes there that's been focused on process automation, data, right? And maybe a new one is, really managing productivity post-COVID. There's opportunities. That's a theme that's really there for this year, that COVID has just been an accelerator of a number of behaviors and technologies that are enablers. The second bucket is really around amenities and services and tech that our occupants and guests touch.
Hmm.
Like
Okay.
I come into a building, I have Wi-Fi, I have carrier service, I go through a turnstile, I might have a mobile engagement, a digital engagement. I might see digital display visuals. I might have common areas, conference rooms, whatever that mix is at a property. And you think about, I mean, that's been a major driver and where, in the last 11 years, because of the developments that we've been doing and the
Okay.
repositioning of bringing in amenities and services in buildings. The themes there have been, definitely driven by new developments, how we reposition our assets for talent, talent for our customers to be able to attract or retain talent. That's
Okay.
what that dynamic is all about. And then really, again, the theme this year is around what's been accelerated by COVID. What do we need to look at for post-COVID? Just like, what are the themes that we need? And IQ's in there, and there's a bunch of other things,
Yeah.
right? To kind of think about that, touchless. And then the third bucket is really, I look at as like running the physical plant, right?
Okay.
All the things that you don't necessarily see behind the scenes. And this is, you can think about the OT technology versus IT. I mean, we're drifting from IT over to OT, right? In this framework. And, so the network as an enabler, cyber, the protection of these assets. I mean, we have buildings that have 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 people on them a day. How do these systems get protected? And then, so the theme there that's clearly present, and we'll talk about, is like data analytics, elevated analytics for operational excellence. Like how, where does that, we're starting a new decade. We started a new decade. We're in 2021. What does that journey look like for this decade? And again, we'll riff a little bit on that, but that's the way I think about just three buckets. So.
Okay. In that first bucket, what do you mean by I'm picturing that as like the business side of
Yeah,
running a
correct.
building. Okay.
Absolutely.
You call it the platform?
Some of that business process bleeds into,
Yeah.
what you do for meters and utility, like let's say electrical billing. You think about these bridges across the fabric of those three kind of buckets I talked about.
Yeah.
There's connections across
Oh,
the
yeah.
three. So, but it is the business side. It's running this public company, and we have 750 employees. And how do we service them? And I've got another 450 contractors on our platform, that operate and service our customers every day. And that's that kind of, enablement on that side. So
I see. Okay. I get it now. But I'm seeing that as a huge advantage of those three kind of buckets, or I guess you could call them silos, sort of feeding up because they're so integrated naturally. In reality of getting things done, any bucket requires integration with the other two.
Yeah. Again, I'll talk a little bit about our converged approach and how we look at this from a security perspective.
Yeah, so can we talk, so let's get into kind of the smart buildings aspect of this, right? So you guys are only in North America, right?
We are only in the US right now. Yeah.
Before we hit record, you were talking about how things are different in other countries, past couple of guests from Australia. So like in the US, can you talk about the context around the business case and the drivers for technology?
Sure. And I'm going to maybe focus more, this context of smart building facility, James, that makes a lot of sense. So, I have a presentation deck. I've done a couple of keynotes around just like, what does this coming decade look like? And, one of the first slides I kind of talk about is that, our platform is fundamentally a multi-tenant office provider. Right. And when you look at our customers, we provide space. They design, build out that space. They bring in all their technologies. They bring in access control. They bring in cameras. They bring in Wi-Fi. They bring in, everything to curate that space for their culture, culture and brand, which is really, really important for their talent. And we provide utilities into that space, right? They tap water, they tap air, they tap, maybe carrier service to bring into the space, but it's really their space. So you have this boundary at the door in this landlord versus customer relationship. And so the notion that like sensors are everywhere in a multi-tenant office building, James, that paradigm is not what exists today. So if I'm a corporate owner of space, like a Microsoft campus or Google own that space, or I'm a hospital or I'm a university, I own everything. I control every aspect of what goes into that asset, into that building. And the business drivers are again much different. I'd love to talk about data lakes, but I don't have all that data inside the tenant space right now, inside our customer space. So, and then the other dynamic is we in our portfolio we have a lot of large customers. So we service Microsoft and Google and Salesforce. They're not looking for the landlord to solve that, and they even keep their talent even captive inside their space. They feed them. It's like they're not coming out to amenities. They're basically being really curated, and maybe captive is a strong word, but they are, really kind of servicing their talent in a different way. So again, this landlord customer relationship is one that, and then I'll just kind of comment, because the other, again, I've been on a couple calls this past week, and I kind of shake my head sometimes when we talk about like what customers are looking for, right, in this innovation. And a couple of years ago, I volunteered to do a keynote or sit on a panel on a main stage with our facility manager. So it was our customers in the audience at this conference. So it wasn't the landlord side; it was customer. And I was like, "Oh, I'm so excited! I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna have this great conversation with our customers about tech and how we can innovate." And it was like, there was like no dynamic there. I mean, there's dynamic at the top of the market. There are clear leaders in how, like a Google and Microsoft that are thinking about this, but it falls off very quickly, right? So I always want to kind of be grounded and realistic in terms of expectations. And I loved just listening to some of your sessions. You had a lot of Australians on, which I love. I love Australia. I love that dynamic, because they seem to be ahead of us sometimes, but understanding like they have performance-based standards in the market and they're dictated by the government. They control or provision more services for their tenants in terms of infrastructure, even ceilings and lighting, than we would do in a North American context, right?
Yeah.
So it's been fascinating. Just kind of, again, I always kind of go to the business drivers and dynamics. That doesn't mean you're not trying to continue to solve this, but it is a dynamic that really you need to be grounded in when you think about investments and getting a return on investment, and also building a partnership that paradigm hasn't been in the market with your customers about even sharing data. I mean, that's not a paradigm that's in this market, in the US market, right? So anyway, so I just more, even access control. Everyone has their own access control system inside this building. I'm sitting in Prudential Tower today, and and we provide a turnstile down to the base building, but everyone has their own system, right? So anyway, so I don't know if that makes sense, but that's
it does. So how do you guys get around that, right? So we're talking about, in my mind, and the way I teach this in my course is like that we have these deeply ingrained split incentives, and there needs to be someone that bridges the gap and figures out how to align the incentives, or there needs to be like top-down regulation, right? Like we see in New York City and DC and other cities. So like, how do you guys see this like playing out? Maybe this is part of your keynotes that you've been giving.
Yeah. So first of all, I'll start with the construct of like just defining smart buildings. James, how do you define it, right? I'm quoted as saying like, we don't have smart buildings, we have buildings with smart technologies. That term has been around a long time. And I also, I know you referenced me, I'm using a baseball analogy again, we're in the really 1 or 2 innings of that journey. But so I think one of the things I'm kind of been toying around, and I've been doing it with some peers of ours, is like, is it really about a digital building, right? Is it about digital? Because I talked about those 3 buckets, and am I smart over here? Am I smart here? Where am I playing smart, right? Or is it really about digital plays and investments and innovation that you're trying to achieve, whether it be in access control, whether it be in the point of nirvana that you have a self-tuning, self-commissioning building that is completely adapting itself throughout the outside conditions and internal conditions of a building. I mean, that is clearly an end game here that we're all after, but that is only one aspect of what you're talking about in terms of the investments you do, right? So let's say you started a new building and you said, I want to build the smartest building. Okay, let's say you want to build the most sustainable building. Let's say I want to build the healthiest building. I mean, all those have different prisms in how you would think about the technologies and what you would bring into the fabric of a building to achieve that goal. And so defining smartest is that's just context, right? So saying that, I think we've been very focused on customer touch points when I talk about digital. I mean, you have the back of house and running the plant. I've got some innovation going on there, but let's just focus on some touch points and maybe some use cases on the front of the house.
Okay.
So first off, we have been running a converged network for our building since 2006.
Okay.
We started that journey really early. And the first building was a building we built in Boston here, Atlantic Wharf. And that building runs on a single fiber backbone. All systems converge onto that backbone. And what we've been doing is any new developments have a network spec now. So you think about buildings, even our larger buildings have redundant fiber backbones with cross connects. Everything converges onto a fiber backbone. The initial journey there was focused on network efficiencies, monitoring. In 2012, 13, it became cyber, right? Became prevalent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so again, a journey of segmentation, controlling remote access, protecting that converged network, both IT and OT assets, right? And then moving on to really then that platform facilitating integrations as we've kind of innovated, right? So again, some innovations, right? So I have an access control. We sponsored, if you were a visitor to one of our buildings that had a turnstile, we do 1.8 million visitor check-ins annually pre-COVID, 1.8 million.
Wow.
In our buildings, right? So how do you solve that to be a better experience on a very broad level, right? So again, we innovated on the ability to have a QR code that's delivered to you 2 hours before you come. And I just walk through the turnstile. So again, if the tenant is a customer is allowing us, they're taking ownership of that, literally that, that's a process now, and all our buildings are lit up with turnstiles, right? So that's solving for a touch point that is really, really important. Another one would be an example where we've done, I talked about every customer having its own access control system, and our base building's access control system. And these are maintained manually right now. So we innovated on a web service that literally synchronizes a base building system. So let's say a large tenant issues their badge to their employees, right? And we want that card to work at our base building.
Yeah.
I mean, we synchronize hundreds of thousands of records with large tenants.
Wow. Okay.
So you think about that as an enabler, because again, they want every single one of their employees, if they're coming to this city, being able to access that space.
Yeah.
It's a really powerful, and the minute that person is separated from the company, literally minutes later, that badge is deactivated at the entrance of the building.
Wow.
That's the kind of technology so you kind of find opportunities around. So we're out, James, on the street right now with an RFI on workplace experience, occupant guest engagement, right? We've looked at this 3 times over the last 4 years, have been cautious. But we recognize we need to figure it out. We need to figure out this, right? So we had 4 responses come in on Friday. I have 8 hours of sessions structured, with an evaluation team in the next 5 days.
Wow.
And we picked 2 properties to deploy this at initially and figure it out for Boston Properties. And again, the other dynamic is every property is different. Right? Every property is different in how it's organized. And we picked one in a downtown urban environment that has this dynamic, and it has a complete set of activity around the property that needs to be kind of figured out. And then we have an 19 building corporate campus on Route 1 in Princeton, New Jersey, that is about community. It's about suburban community, and it has a completely different set of kind of requirements and drivers. And through that, we're trying to figure this out. So, I look at these customer touch points, and I think you're sitting in your home, but I left my home this morning. I went through public space. I engaged with some public space services. I come into owner-controlled space. Every building is different from the services and then I came into my workplace, my employer, controls this workplace,
Mm-hmm.
and what an owner has control over and can deliver in that journey in terms of touch points is different by property. So that's the thing where, I'm coming back to this owner, the landlord tenant boundary, and just how we navigate this for value, for effectiveness, for ROI. And that's kind of what we're trying to figure out with this kind of, again, digital strategy, but I'm kind of pointing out a couple of examples here, right? So
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think after you have a chance to reflect on this, so you said it's round 3 of tenant engagement.
yep,
You should come back and tell us what you learned.
yep, yep,
We'll do a deep
yep,
dive on that
yeah,
topic.
yeah. But
Okay.
integrations are tough, James. Integrations are tough.
Yeah.
Engagement with customers are tough. It's not an easy, and luckily we have some large ones that have sophistication, and that doesn't say that we shouldn't be doing it. I'm just saying that it's work, and you have to be thoughtful, and the engagement model needs to be right. So,
Absolutely. Hey guys, just another quick note from our sponsor, Nexus Labs, and then we'll get back to the show. This episode is brought to you by Nexus Foundations, our introductory course on the smart buildings industry. If you're new to the industry, this course is for you. If you're an industry vet but want to understand how technology is changing things, this course is also for you. The alumni are raving about the content, which they say pulls it all together, and they also loved getting to meet the other students on the weekly Zoom calls and in the private chat room. You can find out more about the course at courses.nexuslabs.online. All right, back to the interview. Cool. Well, that was a great overview of networking, cybersecurity, tenant engagement, access control. That's only part of what you're focused on, right? So today, I think we're going to dive deeper into a couple of other topics besides those. Maybe we'll save those topics for later. Maybe we'll do a deep dive on one of those later. But the next topic I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned it a few times, which is you have a data story. You told me. So I thought we'd hit data, I thought we'd hit energy, and I thought we'd hit IAQ, and then sort of balancing the 3 of those things as our sort of deep dive today.
Sure, James. Yeah. So I already talked about being Kaizen. I read a book, Tom Davenport, I'm going to quote. Tom has been just a teacher. He's a local expert on data, and he published a book in 2008 that I just kind of latched onto. It became a framework for thinking about it. And we were kind of in a transition period where, back in the early that decade, we were doing a lot of custom software. Custom software was over. It was transitioning to, providers providing solutions in the space.
Okay.
And the demand from the company for more real-time analytics, mostly focused on financial, was really kind of key. So I have a little side story. We're trying to figure it out. And I had an inbound cold call, and this person was very persistent. It was from Oak Brook, Illinois. And it was a moment of weakness at 5:30 at night. I picked up the phone and I was like, okay, I'm going to give you 15 minutes. I always say, I'll give you 15 minutes, right?
Okay.
So I did a 15-minute call with them, along with current still vice president of applications. And I went to 45 minutes, right? And the next week, I literally got 4 people on a plane, and we flew to Chicago. And we met with them. We met with Inland, because they were a customer of theirs, and we went on a data journey. And we built a business case to really tackle our financials, do really real-time analytic, and built the infrastructure framework. And one of the things in the business case I remember is this will be a journey that has unexpected results and impact, right? We don't know where the journey is going to take us, right? So we literally proved out this incredible benefit to the company in building this capability, and we pivoted off custom and built out a data team, right? So I have a director of application data services. I have an enterprise data architect. I have data analysts, right? That's competitive advantage that we built out in the depth of the company, right? And then we pivoted and focused it on the rent roll and space. We have this incredibly rich, dynamic way of looking at our space and projecting and looking back, and it just can do tumble salts. And then we kind of pivoted and applied this to energy, right?
Okay.
So the energy story is, it's really a case study in my view, and what we've done is, if I went back to our first GRESB filing, probably in 13, 14, it was a horror show. I could use stronger words. It was just pulling the data together, and not having any confidence in what you were putting in.
Yeah.
It was just a disaster.
It's like monthly utility bills, or what do you?
Yeah, or just kind of putting together the data that needed to be put together to create a composite for the filing, right? So we went on a data journey, a process journey. Literally, we aligned at the time to Internoc, now Hatch Data, and we literally standardized all our pulse meters, standardized all our billing and invoices, and the data extraction off that. We built with them a direct feed into Energy Star. So we literally that we pointed our alignment to Energy Star, right? And then we brought in Ben Myers, who's our VP of Sustainability. You should have him on a future. Just two of you would ref. He's really an incredible, dynamic leader in our industry. But then we partnered with Measurable. So literally, we brought it into Energy Star, packaged it in Measurable. And I think last year when he did the filing, he did it a month early with complete confidence, that could hit the button. And, it's all rationalized, right? So what did that provide to us as a company? So we got comfortable, like in 2016, of stating sustainability goals as a public company, right? And that was a 5-year set of goals. Well, what do? We started to measure ourselves, got everyone engaged, executive sponsorship around this with the ability to measure. And we achieved those 3 years early.
Okay.
But we restated another 5 year, and we're achieving that. So again, putting this infrastructure in place. So last year we were, Energy Star Partner of the Year. Again, got an award this year for sustained excellence. We're just a leader in that space. And if you look at our newly launched website and just the report we came out with, just again leading. It's really important to how we are executing our platform for our customers. And it's a data story. So we just announced on Earth Day this year, we will go to carbon neutral operations by 2025. We created a sustainability committee as part of our board of directors. Just again, the fabric of this next journey. So I do think we're in a moment in time, James. We're sitting here in 2021, and I couldn't be more excited about data tools, data capabilities that this industry has access to right now. Totally. And that's been enabled by the cloud. It's been enabled at data at scale. It's been enabled by just the innovation that partners like Microsoft have done in making tools approachable. And I know there's been a large group that has been at this for a long time. I know, like Switch, and there's been a lot of activity, but the opportunity now is very clear as we enter this decade. And so we got to energy. So where do we apply it next? Where do we go with this, right? So then we applied it to access control, right? In 2019. So we built this amazing, I have like 45 buildings, millions and millions of read records. Prior to COVID was about density and space use and how our customers were, and then operational insights into how we manage our buildings. And that data now has come really important in COVID and how space use and how repopulation will occur. I literally have a live, we could hop over and look at it right now of what's happened in this building right now, right? Okay. How many people have come into the building? So a real journey, it's been great.
So it's the same sort of process or framework around measuring and improving upon the data that you're collecting. And then you're just applying it to these different end uses, essentially. Or use cases.
Yeah. Again, we come back for success factors. You want to be aligned to an organizational goal and objective and then making that investment. But again, I think building this organizational muscle and capability has been a differentiator in how we've tracked the last 10 years. And again, I'm excited about the coming decade. And in framing the next decade, it does kind of start to pivot back to this facility data. And all right, we've achieved this with what we've done in energy, but what is the next tool set?
Yeah.
What is the next tool set, right? And we'll talk about IAQ. Let's say you add IAQ, you're just creating another silo. Occupancy is going to be really important in anything around energy, and IAQ and occupancy is such a variable that you have to have as part of the equation if you're going to go on this journey. So anyway, that's
How do you see that space evolving? Because obviously you have some level of occupancy data with the access control systems that you just talked about. How do you see that evolving with all these new occupancy sensor companies?
Yeah. So again, you have two, we talk about the boundary at the door. Right?
Yeah.
So I need to know the population coming in the building, but again, I don't know necessarily behind the door of, let's say a tenant has 10 stories of a building, again, how do I garner that information for potentially optimizing energy use, air and comfort? It's been all those come into play. And so So I think that needs to be solved for a landlord perspective. And then again, if there's a model in how we think about data sharing,
Okay.
that paradigm has to be kind of challenged and evolve, right?
Yeah, because
And I don't see that happening tomorrow, James. It's going to be
yeah.
it's going to be a process here, right?
Okay.
So
Because if you got data from occupancy data from your tenant, then you could do a better job, and vice versa. If they got some sort of information from you, they could do a better job in the systems that they're
mhm,
controlling. Yeah, that's a tough one.
yeah,
That's a tough
but solvable. And I think we're going to be
one.
on a journey to solve that. I mean, IAQ is definitely that's here to stay, and we have to move right now. It's really the paradigm on IAQ is basically a testing protocol, and that needs to move to active monitoring.
Yep.
So that's another journey that we have to figure out as an industry, and we're very active in kind of figuring this out, because again, these systems, the HVAC systems, were very much built on comfort, on energy efficiency, and ventilation. But like, if you start to amp ventilation or this dynamic around air, well, that's not how this was built.
Yeah.
And then underlying the variable of occupancy, that's the formula. I mean, that's the formula for, those variables have to be in play to really optimize a specific space, like a conference room I'm sitting in, or a kitchen, or a gathering place, or so that's going to also be a journey. So
Yeah, this is the reason I wanted to like dive into this, because energy and IAQ are both interconnected, right? Interrelated, dependent on each other. Um, but they're also crossing all these boundaries of these, tenant versus landlord, meter versus submeter. Like, we're crossing so many of the different organizational silos
mhm.
with those two. Well, let's dive into energy real quick, and then we'll talk about kind of how they all relate. But so energy, we talked about, it's like basically setting a baseline, the traditional energy management process, setting a baseline. How can we improve upon it? Doing projects. So how have you guys like met your goals so early?
So it's just been basically, I mean, Ben would argue, when we measure, we build for success, and it's been through our partnership with Hatch, our partnership, just internally dynamic of working measure by measure.
Yeah.
And then obviously also, James, a capital program that is focused on, in some cases, significant in changes in a building's dynamic, right?
Mhm.
So again, the capital program to deal with aging infrastructure, and further optimizing, that's a natural cycle. But if you bring it with focus, that has had results, right, in the last 6-7 years, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. So again, I don't think there's I mean, I'm not saying anything that's should be is revealing, insightful. It's again
Yeah.
the process of sponsorship, organizational alignment, working towards a set of goals, getting aligned, and everyone marching in a direction, in all the tools that you have available to execute to achieve a better, in this case, a better carbon footprint, right? So
Totally. Yeah, and I just read this article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday that I was going to put in the newsletter, but it's behind their paywall, and I didn't want to do that. So, but anyways, it was basically kind of like looking at this from a little bit of like a victim mentality. Is basically like, property owners, they have to deal with COVID, and now you're throwing all these regulations, and here comes the Biden administration, and it was kind of like this victim sort of mentality, and it was like the ability to charge more rent for a more energy efficient building, that's not proven. And it was kind of just like taking this like it didn't feel very good. It sounds like you guys have a very like a totally different mindset.
yeah, I would say, I mean, I guess maybe it would depend on who you talk to, but I know Ben would welcome some of the work that's being done in the regs in our market, and we're obviously in progressive markets, and we need to be responsive and aligned to what's going on in New York and San Francisco and Boston, and they're all
Mhm.
progressive locations and what they're doing, even LA, but we're in Santa Monica, but there's some really progressive stuff going on. So
Totally. So when I think about energy, I think about sort of meter level data and analytics, like you're describing, and then I think about what usually happens, and what we've talked about a ton on the podcast, is that you realize a building needs to be improved upon. And then what you either do is you do like a retrofit, or you start to look at the data in the systems that are sort of, so you might do fault detection and diagnostics, that
Yep.
type of thing. How
Yep.
do you guys look at that sort of dichotomy of I call it the hierarchy of needs, right? So we first need meter data, and then we need interval data, and then we need FTD, right? So how do you think about getting into that sort of
Yep.
program?
So obviously, the cloud enablement of solutions. You take your data off-prem, and it's enabled and amplified and elevated in a cloud solution. So that's a really good point, James. Like, we got to this place. So again, what is the next set of tools you apply to achieve your next round of improvements, even though they might be continually incremental, right?
Yeah.
You're kind of thinking about this, right? So we piloted Switch, we have piloted prescriptive data, we have piloted solutions from Siemens, we've looked at Schneider, but we haven't necessarily landed on a standard, right? We've got these pilots trying to get a grounding on their value, their return, the ability of the teams to absorb and act on the data that's being generated. There's a lot of dynamic there. So we're still on that journey. The market is incredibly in a hype mode in terms of the number of solution providers in the space, some coming from outsider industry with technology solutions, others building it off existing frameworks. And I think it's great. I'm excited about the energy. We talk about this new decade and what's ahead and achieving that goal, that nirvana of a smart building, self-tuning, self-commissioning building. Well, this is a journey of elevated analytics to achieve that. And we're out looking at a number of solutions to figure out a framework for Boston Properties and what that means. You can spend several days a week spending these
I have a
solutions.
vendor landscape, and there's at least 50 in that category, 50 vendors. Yeah. It doesn't surprise me at all. Oh, well, so yeah, we'll talk about it offline, and I'll send you one of the essays I wrote called How Analytics Can Go Mainstream. And it probably brings up a lot of the points that you're running up against on these pilots. We'll link to that in the show notes as well.
Yeah, great. I just love the energy, love the dynamic. I mean, this is all good, James, right? This is all good.
Yes.
So it's,
Yes. Awesome. All right. So that sounds like another working group happening. And then, so you have this IAQ working group happening right now as well. So I'm just curious on like, what's the state of the art thinking, since you're chairing the working group as well. So like, it's really confusing out there from an IAQ standpoint. I mean, one of my clients has a building in Manhattan, and just for reference, they have all of their CO2 set points overridden. They're not doing any demand controlled ventilation right now. Everything's on full outside air mode. And I can't seem to convince them that they need to stop that, but because they're just in wait and see mode, it's kind of just like, well, no one knows what to do. So what do we do? So where are you guys at, I guess?
Yeah. So I think what we're trying to navigate is, as part, so this is kind of bridging out of our health security task force. Ben Myers, again, VP of sustainability, drove that, and he and I stood up this group. So he's really, we were leading this together in November, that brought, again, engineering talent and, business talent, IT talent at the table. And we've gone on this journey. And it's really been, I'll just kind of comment that it's been enlightening across, for engineers to business to sustainability to me, to kind of go on this kind of awareness journey. I armed everyone with aware sensors, the element sensors, Aaron, you had Aaron on, Aaron turned me on to that, and I just literally bought one for every single one, and they could take it home, they could take it to the office, and it was literally like to have a simple device that would elevate awareness on just what we're trying to measure, but it's been really fascinating. So I've got to know Ronald Rowe at Aware, and then we've piloted Wellstat, we've got pilots with SenseWare, so we're kind of building reference points for how this gets executed. And again, I think the thing for us is like, how do you move from a UL test that's once or twice a year, in our case twice a year, to an active monitoring? And that's the journey that we have to figure out. And then you have core and shell, and then you've got tenant space. So again, in a customer space. So again, navigating those dynamics is really the journey ahead for us, James. So.
Yeah. And we talked about it a little bit earlier, but I've always struggled with the different HVAC systems. Like, we have central air conditioning. That's usually where the ventilation comes from. coming from the landlord. Tenant has something else going on. They're controlling their own terminal units, that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
and the distribution design, and yeah, yep.
Yeah, they have their own space sensors, right, that are not necessarily getting back to the landlord. And so there's this, we need to bridge that gap in some way.
Yeah,
So
and that process was already underway. That whole, as a trend prior to COVID, it's just been accelerated. And again, we think that is here to stay, and just kind of figuring that out.
What do you see the model as, like the kind of replicable model that can bridge that gap?
Well, I don't know if I have an answer yet, James.
Okay,
We're gonna
figuring
figure
it
that
out.
out. I mean, clearly we have to be responsive to our customers, and but it's gonna be a process. We're gonna figure this out. And again, we got some really smart people thinking about it, and trying to think about it, how it works in the context of our platform, for the benefit of customers. So yeah.
Totally. Yeah, and it's such a multi-factor problem too. Like that one client, the air handler is in the tenant space in that building, and
Mhm.
so the air handler could be in the landlord space in another building. So it's just like this, yeah,
Yeah,
very
and
dynamic.
as you know, I mean, it's a combination of the ventilation and the filtration, right? So
Yeah.
both those come into play in achieving a result. And again, we've also played with HEPA units as supplemental,
Hmm.
again, whether that's long term or not. But I mean, there's ways of approaching. Like, I'm in a conference room. I never considered the dynamic of this conference room in my space. How can I actually I can do things that are maybe not tied to the base building. I can actually supplement and
Yeah.
achieve a result, right? So
Yeah, and Aaron just kind of did a little mastermind presentation a couple weeks ago for our pro members around like state of the art as well. And yeah, he kind of reinforced the fact that it's not just about air handlers. In fact, in some systems, it's not about air handlers at all. It's about what's happening locally.
yes, yeah.
So how, as you guys are kind of like, you have energy spun up, you have these goals set, and then you're spinning up this IAQ group. How are you thinking about how those two kind of interact? And for people that don't
Well,
know,
actually, there are members across both groups. Yeah, there's
that's your
definitely
way.
some of our engineering leads and others that are crossing both teams, and that they're along. That's just the next logical question. Because again, the challenge is: are you building another silo of just this IAQ data, or are you going to rationalize it
Hmm.
in combination? And what is that? Is there a journey here that we need to really be thoughtful about? And that's the context here, James. So.
Got it. Got it. Cool. This is good to hear, like how far you guys, it's like kind of like refreshing for me to hear, because I think what I get in the course that I teach a lot is like people are kind of relieved to understand that there's no like magic bullet or like super app or like organization out there that has all this figured out, right? Because we're all trying to figure this out kind of as we go. And it's sort of refreshing to hear that from you guys too, because it's like, you have a lot of smart people that are on this. And
Uh-huh.
it's like there's a lot of things to figure out still, which is awesome, I guess. Very exciting time to be in this space. So with that, I think why don't we just like summarize on how, given how difficult it is, and maybe difficult's not the right word, but like, what do you think it takes to be successful to create these strategies in this
Yeah,
space?
really, in the last 10 years, as we've kind of um, done more in some really significant investments we've done. I find it really important to gain executive sponsorship
Hmm.
on any initiative, and that's from Owen and Doug, in our case, our CEO and president, to have a buy-in on, and then to create a framework. Because again, I went back to framework, so you have to kind of do your due diligence and kind of get grounded in a prism of how you're going to look at it,
Hmm.
and then to execute on it around some clearly defined goals. Again, nothing insightful here, but there's some fundamentals. And then I think the other thing that I've just really valued is just the cross discipline teams that we spin up here that bring expertise and different insights into a process that builds depth and builds a better result as kind of foundational. So again, how you conduct and do innovation, there's just some tenets there. The other thing I just recognized this year, James, I started doing a technology briefing series
Hmm.
for our construction and development discipline. I've ran 3 of them already
Wow.
this year, and it's just all on different topics. And one of them was on IAQ with Ben and some other engineers. But it's really, how do you get the level of awareness across the fabric of our company to understand and provide in context for how you think about the access control, where you think about the network, think about cyber, think about DAS, distributed antenna system, think about telecom provisioning, think about, these are all things that our teams deal with, and how do we facilitate those in our development and construction trades as example. So, yeah.
Totally. Yeah, that cross-functional group forming seems really novel and important. I think the other thing that's important, that's novel from what I'm hearing from you versus hearing from others, is these 3 different groups you talked about funneling up to you, and you able to make decisions and facilitate across the groups, right? And sort of knock down silos.
Yeah. No, and again, not everything's perfect. You want innovation occurring wherever it occurs in the company and in the context of the company, but you try to provide context. We try to be thoughtful in our decisions and what we do. So again, we have a role there. It's not always perfect, but it's we try to do it better than others. So let's put it that way. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
So as we kind of wrap up here, what are you excited about besides what we've already talked about? Or maybe that's what it is. But what are you excited about for the rest of the year?
I'm just so excited about being post-COVID. I know that there's a couple of others, and I'm excited about visiting and engaging with our teams downstream. I told you I'm going on my first bit trip, doing an East Coast swing and then a West Coast swing, and that hasn't happened in 14, 15 months. And that's gonna, just such an important, in terms of engagement and understanding what's going on around the fabric of our company. And then I'm just generally excited about I had a mini kind of IT summit for my team yesterday, and we literally went through all the investments we're making and did these mini briefings across the team. So we just got some really exciting things going on, and I'm excited about what we did last year. I'm excited about this year, and just having impact for the company. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, it was great to hear about all the different parts of the Smart Buildings program at Boston Properties. So thanks for walking us through.
And it could be digital buildings, right?
Yes. Well, thanks for coming on and telling us about it.
Yeah, thank you, James. I really appreciate the conversation today. So it was great.
All right, friends, thanks for listening to this episode of the Nexus Podcast. For more episodes like this and to get the weekly Nexus newsletter, which, by the way, readers have said is the best way to stay up to date on the future of the smart buildings industry, please subscribe at nexuslabs.online. You can find the show notes for this conversation there as well. Have a great day.